Welcome to Volume 4 for That Time Satoru Gojo Got Reincarnated as a Slime. If you haven't seen Tensura, or That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, or JuJutsu Kaisen, or the prior 3 parts of this series, I highly recommend you watch those first before you get into this so you understand the content completely. But to get into it now, as I'm sure you already know, Satoru Gojo is now Rimuru Tempest. He has taken the position of protagonist in this series of magic and demon lords. How is this going to affect him? Well, let's get into it. Last time Gojo met with the Demon Lord of Destruction herself, Milim, or Milim. She is one of the oldest and most powerful demon lords. The pink-haired demon lord Lolly would have absolutely obliterated Gojo, turning his confidence upside down. But little after that, we would see Charybdis, one of the children of Veldora, the dragon who named Gojo in this life as Rimuru, would have arrived at Tempest, attacking the city that Gojo had been helping build with the power of his jujutsu and his friends. Gojo would have defended it though, defeating Charybdis and placing himself on the notice of all of the demon lords as a growing power within the great forest of Jura. Our story takes place the night after Milim would have quickly flown off, telling Rimuru that she would let the other demon lords know not to bother him since they were besties now. Gojo would sigh, saying, "Whatever," as she flies off into the distance. That night, Satoru would have a dream though. He would be looking down, realizing his hair was a deep shade of black, a color it had never been before. Looking up, he would realize that this was Shizu's memories. The memories of the body of the woman who he had absorbed after coming into this world and gained human form. Within this dream vision, Gojo would see several children, one with black hair like herself, one with red and orangish hair and spiky long locks, someone else sticking their nose in a book, and a blonde girl playing with dolls. Oh, and there was a blonde kid who was much more tall than the others just playing in the back. What were they all up to and what was going on? He had no idea, but when he woke up, he would feel tears streaming down his face. He had no idea why, but seeing these memories reminded him. It reminded him of his time when he was a teacher himself, and his time with his students back at Jujutsu High. He would see images of Itadori Yuji, Megami, and Nobara, along with the second-year students like Yuta, in his mind, remembering the time that he had spent cultivating them, and hoping that they were all right, not knowing truly for certain whether they had ever been able to defeat the man known as the King of Curses. But that's all in the past. There's nothing he can do about it now anyway, so he should just focus on his life in the world now. But he still couldn't get this nagging feeling out of his head. Why did he feel so uneasy? His body, it was shaking, as if though there was something that he wanted to do desperately. The next day, he would alert Ranga, saying that he feels like he needs to finish Shizu's will, and that there's something that he has to do to be truly put at ease. Now that Charybdis had been taken down and it seems like Tempest was in a stable position, he hoped to leave it in the hands of the dwarves and the other goblins to continue working on constructing it. Gojo would quickly put up a barrier around the entire city using Infinity, being able to create a barrier now using Magicules and the help of Great Sage to apply Infinity into that space. This was something that he had learned to do with his combination of Magicules and Cursed Energy. He actually got this idea after seeing how Milim had ripped through his Infinity almost instantly, being able to surpass the power of the world-cutting slash that had ended his life in a mere moment. If he hadn't had regeneration in the body of a slime, he probably would have died back then. But because of this ability, and his Great Sage, which lets him learn even faster than just having the 6 eyes, he was able to see how Milim had done this, wrapping herself in Magicules, which, as you could tell, was a higher power source than Cursed Energy. Magicules themselves filling everything, both positive and negative. By combining these two and creating this null-like energy, and even force, that's what created Magicules. So as a Magicule, he could use it as negative or positive energy, hence why healing magic exists while also attack spells do. Basically being able to have a higher level of power because he can turn his cursed energy pool into Magicules, essentially giving him 2 sources of Magicules that he can pull from. So Gojo has become stronger in how he manipulates his cursed energy. Through this, he would create the barrier technique before leaving Tempest, telling them that they should be able to get out since his Infinity has the ability to automatically detect threats. Gojo would feel at ease now. Remembering how safe he felt when he had entered Tengen's barriers, he now hoped that he could provide the same cover for the citizens of Tempest. Gojo would sigh, feeling a sense of relief. Ranga, let's go. We've got to get to Engrassia. And just like that, Gojo and Ranga would be on their way, with the goblins waving and cheering, hoping for their great one's return. Anyway, the Honored One would first head to the Kingdom of Bloomend, realizing that it's not going to be easy to get in contact with the students that Shizu was teaching. Through Shizu's memories, Gojo had learned that she had been teaching in the Kingdom of Engrassia, the same capital city where the main head branch of the Adventurers Guild was, the Freedom Association. Gojo would first need a letter of recommendation so that he could meet with the headmaster of the Freedom Academy, the school that had taken in the Otherworlder children, kids who had been summoned to this world, if he wanted to become a teacher for them. So that's where he'd go first. Heading to Bloomend, he'd meet with Fuse. Of course, just like in the original manga, we would have a little sub-arc where he becomes an adventurer, with him even taking on a greater demon as a final test and obliterating it using blue, ripping the demon apart in front of the other adventurer candidates. The tester would be horrified looking at this masked man, with Gojo using Shizu's mask to conceal his magicules. He would laugh, saying he was just getting a little warmed up, before Fuse would come out and see the destruction that he had caused, telling Rimuru that please don't destroy this entire city. Gojo would laugh, saying, "Fuse, you know I'd never do that? Come on, man, line up a little." Fuse would grumble, saying that if he's here, there's probably some real trouble coming. No, nothing like that. I just need your help with getting a pass to meet the guild head of the Adventurers Guild. Yuki Kagurazaka, of course. Fuse would be surprised, wondering what Rimuru would want to meet that guy for, the leader of the entire Adventurer Guild. But, oh well. He knew Rimuru wasn't a bad person, having protected his adventurers and heard of his great deeds, and of course having met him in person before. Fuse would sigh and reluctantly decide that writing an introduction letter wouldn't be that bad of an idea. What's the harm? It's not like Yuki Kagurazaka's a pushover either. And with that, Gojo and Ranga would be on their way to Engrassia. One of the first things that Gojo would notice as he enters the city is how much more advanced it is than some of the other kingdoms he's been to so far, being Bloomend and Dwargon. Dwargon's pretty advanced all in itself, but he never had seen glass like this, looking as he would take his finger gently tracing the glass on a window shop, seeing how thin it was, how expertly crafted. How is this even possible in this medieval world? Gojo would simply wonder these things. Being a fan of tourism and travel himself, he'd think he'd definitely have to get some souvenirs for Gobta and the others. Gojo would laugh, thinking about the time that he had realized Gobta had actually had a potential to learn the 10 Shadows Curse technique, thinking how hilarious it was that this goblin he had met was actually proficient with shadow manipulation, the same technique that Megami had used. He hoped that the Grand Divine General would never have to be summoned. If it showed up in this world, I could probably take care of it pretty easily. These would be Gojo's thoughts as he's being escorted to the elevator by the front desk attendant who had taken his request and his letter from Fuse, the Bloomend Adventurers Guild head. And with that, she would guide Satoru up to the Guild Master's office, where he would finally come face to face with Yuki Kagurazaka, one of Shizu's students, the other being Hinata Sakaguchi. He had known from Shizu's memories that they had left her at a fairly early time, but that was many years ago. In fact, the two of them, Hinata and Yuki, were about as old as he was when he had first died, so they were approximately the same age at this point. And even then, Gojo could tell, even without the 6 eyes, that this Yuki guy was no joke. Yuki would smile, looking up as he says, "Yeah, who is it? Who's come to visit me at this time of day? I didn't have any appointments set." Yuki's golden and red-flicked eyes would watch over Gojo, seeing the mask that Shizu once wore. However, his body was more masculine, his hair a silvery white. Yuki would feel shivers, as if though he could feel Gojo's eyes peering right through him, staring at his very soul. Yuki would stand up smirking, saying, "So, how come you look like Shizue Izawa, huh?" Yuki would say, his eyes now glowing with magic power. Gojo would simply say in a coy tone, "Well, I suppose I know her because I ate her." At that point, Yuki would play no games as the desk would go flying, crashing into the wall as he flies forward, throwing a kick. Gojo would simply stand there holding up his hand as the kick would barely even get close to him, with Yuki's eyes widening, seeing as he can't even make contact with him. Gojo would be impressed watching his golden magic power receding from his infinity. It looks like you're not quite as strong as her, but it was a good test anyway. Gojo would sigh as he puts his hand down. Sorry about that, I worded that a little poorly. On purpose, might I add, since he wanted to see how strong Yuki was. He would then say his signature line of, "I'm not a bad slime," the same line he used to rizz up Shizu originally. And Yuki would recognize this, asking if he's from another world or from Japan, just like they were. Gojo would nod, saying, "Yep, that's me. I came from another world just like you guys, but I didn't get to keep my body when I got here. When Shizu passed away, she asked to be rest within me because she didn't feel safe in this world. She didn't want to be consumed by it. So I absorbed her and subsequently gained this form. It's actually pretty similar to my original body, although I had to make a few alterations. I just wasn't quite comfortable looking that attractive, you know? I mean, me and Suguru would get a little zesty back in the day, but nah, I didn't think it was a good idea." Yuki would laugh at Gojo, with the two of them talking about the manga and anime from his time, with Gojo still being a pop culture nerd, just like he was in the original, although maybe not quite as much as Yuji. Gojo, having the 6 eyes, would actually have even better copies of the manga that Great Sage would produce, creating copies of paper and creating manga volumes just for Yuki to read, updating him on all the chapters that he had been updated on. Unfortunately, there were quite a few missing, since at the time he was always getting called out for missions. So while the images were far more detailed and akin to the original art, there were some chapters that would just be missing, since he would just skip them and move on to the next one in the next weekly volume. It was kind of funny. But eventually, the two would begin to trust each other, with Yuki saying that he approves Gojo becoming the professor of the kids Shizue used to teach before she went on her journey to find Leon, since Ifrit was becoming unstable. Gojo would sigh, holding up his hand saying, "Don't worry about it, I've already contained Ifrit. One of the skills I have happens to be very adept at sealing things." Of course, he had to eat him, but he didn't want to say it like that, and sealing things just sounded much cooler. Yuki would trust Gojo, saying that's alright, and he understands why he came back, explaining that the kids don't have much time left, saying that unfortunately they were imperfect summons, beings that had been summoned to this world but couldn't maintain their magicules, and so they'd eventually die. Gojo would nod, wondering if these kids had already given up on trying to live, seeing as everyone around them was telling them that they were already fated to die. Each student would introduce themselves slowly, with him starting off, of course, with Kenya. Kenya just waving a sword and running around like the Energizer Bunny. There would be Chloe, who would be reading her book, Gale, the taller one, and Ryota, the quiet-looking black-haired kid. Oh, and Alice, the puppet player. She's sitting there playing with her toy dolls. Anyway, eventually it would be becoming clear to Gojo that these kids had zero respect for him whatsoever. "What's the point of trying to learn stuff when we're going to be dead anyway?" Kenya would say. Gojo would sigh, saying, You don't seem to have much hope, you know. I promise that I will make sure you all survive. You'll be so old one day that your hair is just as white as mine." Gojo would decide to run a little test. Great Sage and his 6 eyes giving off this clear indication of disruption in their magicules. He could clearly tell that there was something not letting them align their power correctly. Like a person with cursed energy just letting it flow out endlessly. As if though there was no valve to block it. All of that energy leaking out of them eventually, of course, would cause them to perish. And so we would have the same one-on-one duel, with Gojo deciding to use this as a way to both show that he's the strongest, while also gaining some respect from these children. Of course, Kenta would begin using his fire magic and his sword, which couldn't even touch Gojo, but to make it interesting, Gojo would say if he can simply land a single blow on him, then he'll give him the victory. Gojo would stand there still, watching as Kenya begins to swing his sword, easily dodging and weaving, not revealing any cards up his sleeve just yet. Gojo would let him run around for a while to see if he could burn off some of that energy, but nothing seemed to be working. It was pretty clear just from watching that those magicules were not aligning, even if he was using them. They just were too much coming out of Kenya. Anyway, eventually the timer would run out and Ryota would call it, Kenya would end it off screaming, saying that he's going to have his revenge as he runs off crying. After that, Gojo would feel a little guilty, but it would be Chloe's turn. Chloe would put down her book, sighing, saying, "Fine, but if I hurt you, you can't blame me, alright?" Gojo would laugh, saying there's no way anything she could do would possibly hurt him. Chloe would take this as a challenge, getting a little annoyed as she casts water magic, with him realizing she's a spellcaster. Chloe would use water magic and create a tornado around Rimuru, using the blades of water just like she did in the original, and begin spinning them around inside of the vortex, with her shouting that if he promises to leave her alone and stop this nonsense, she'll let him go without hurting him. Gojo would simply walk forward into the blades as they can't even dare to begin to cut through infinity, the water shattering without him even having to use his cut resistance skill from being a slime. And with that, the water magic would dissipate, causing Chloe to have tears in her eyes and start crying as she gets upset that her spell didn't work, her confidence blowing back on her and also embarrassing her. Everyone would have tried to cheer Chloe up, especially Alice, and they'd all be mad at Rimuru even more now. Chloe would walk away, wiping the tears, as she picks her book off, wiping the dust off it from the ground. Finally, it would be Gale's turn, who would fire bullets made out of earth aura. These bullets not even touching Rimuru. Gojo would easily dodge around them with them not even coming into contact with him, and Gale's time would run out quite quickly. He'd be pretty mad saying that's cheating, with Rimuru apologizing, but that's life. At this point, it's Ryota's turn, the quiet kid who had been taking the time until now. Gojo had completely misjudged him. Even with 6 eyes and Great Sage, he hadn't expected his body enhancement skill to be this. He was expecting him to use some enhancement skills, but he didn't know it would transform him like this. Ryota would have gone from the quiet and chill out dude to being a little crash out, with Ryota screaming and biting like a cocaine crack addict who's begging you for money. Well, anyway, that's a little too much detail. But Ryota would begin striking at Gojo mercilessly, using his claws and teeth and everything. Let's just say Gojo's image of Ryota has been completely ruined in his mind. Lastly, but not least, Alice herself would use her puppetry, a rather unique technique that Rimuru would actually find interesting. Gojo thinking it's a unique ability that might make her the strongest out of all of these kids someday, finding it to be incredible. He'd even compliment her on it, saying that if she continues working on this, it might pose a threat to him at some point. Of course, he didn't really believe that, but all the same, her potential was definitely there. He decided about using purple on the animals just to show off a little bit, but Great Sage would quickly add a comment saying there is a 100% chance that if you do this, that Alice will cry. Gojo would laugh, deciding that he wasn't trying to get that sort of reputation as a teacher, and would quickly just continue batting them away, saying this is kind of annoying though. Finally, he'd get fed up with it as he uses infinity, covering his body in a larger distance, increasing the distance of infinity, and just letting them pound on it from afar. Finally, at least they're on my viewpoint now. Finally, the test would be over, with Gojo successfully proving to be far stronger than them. They would at least respect him for that. The students would lose, but again, to Gojo's dismay, their energy and magicules inside their souls hasn't decreased at all. And he can't even use Degenerate, the skill that he had gained after crossing to this world, to separate it from their souls. It doesn't have that same ability like that one cursed spirit. If only it was that precise. Or if he had that cursed technique. The same one that patchwork face guy had, the ability to manipulate souls, he could probably have removed the magicules from them. Oh well. Anyway, afterwards Rimuru or Gojo would pull out Shizu's mask, explaining that he's an old friend of Shizu, and would also promise that he's going to save their lives. Not a single one of them will die under his care. After all, it was her final wish. As he says this, he'd remember his time that he spent with Riko Amanai and Geto. Suguru and him, they were spent all that time together, and in the end, it amounted to nothing. Because it was all meaningless. It all ended in tragedy. But he would still promise that he's going to save them. And with that, the real level of the game begins. With this, the students begin calling Gojo Gojo Sensei as he requests, which would cause Gojo to basically become elated, with him saying, yes, yes, I love the sound of that. Ah, it's like music to my ears. The students would be a bit turned off by that. Is he Diddy or something? But anyway, Gojo would have some resources. Remembering how Shizu had survived in this world for so long, thinking about how Ifrit had been fused with her, wondering if the demon lord Leon Cromwell had known about this symptom of otherworlders. He would decide to start with that, with him visiting Trainee. Gojo could easily do it. With all of them holding hands and making contact with Gojo, he could use his teleportation technique, reverting them back to the Great Forest of Jura for the cost of only some cursed energy, far cheaper than the magicals it would take for him to use actual teleportation. A spell that exists in this world, unlike the cursed techniques that were able to be inherited through blood alone, that could be learned. This teleportation using far more energy though. So in that sense, this cursed techniques that he possessed weren't worthless after all. Considering while magicules were more powerful, they had higher drawbacks as well. While using cursed energy was relatively easy for Gojo, especially with his huge pool of power that he's accumulated thus far. Trainee would inspect the kids, realizing that they definitely could at least carry greater elementals to inhabit them, with these spirits hopefully being able to stabilize their magic from their soul. Pretty much confirming Gojo's suspicions of how Shizu had survived so long. We have a small time skip to a few days later, where we have Gojo outside eating a picnic with his students, enjoying the nice air and sparring. You see, Gojo was curious about something. He wanted to see if any of them potentially had the ability to use cursed energy. Considering that Gabta was able to use shadows, and the Tensha's technique no less, it's possible there are others here who have a gift for cursed energy. And who else besides otherworlders, like these kids who actually come from my world, and may have been exposed to it at some point. Gojo would sigh. They have so much magicule it's hard to tell if they have any cursed energy leaking out. Suddenly, Gojo would see something looking up as he'd see it before anyone else, telling the kids to stay back as he holds his arm out. As a huge blue sky dragon would fly, hurtling through the air, ripping its wings through the clouds as it heads towards the capital city of Engrassia. Rimuru would leave the kids with Shizu's mask, saying that if they need to hide, to put that on, which Chloe would catch, leading everyone else to start fighting over it, while Gojo flies up into the air to go and confront the dragon. Gojo would fly up with his hands in his pockets as he flies over at an infinitely faster speed than this dragon could move. Just as the dragon's claws were about to penetrate into a sheep from a merchant, Gojo would appear right in front of it, its claws ripping into infinity as an explosion of power and force would cause the dragon to meet an immovable object, its leg, claw, and foot getting ripped off from the force of impact into infinity, with it going crashing into the countryside. Gojo would quickly walk up to it, his hands still in his pockets, as he stomps his foot down at its neck, holding his hand out as he says, "This is boring," using gluttony on it as he completely absorbs the creature and it disappears within an instant. He'd have Great Sage analyze it to see if there's any useful skills. Not with too much. What was I expecting? At least while some of these skills are completely unapplicable to me, things like sharp claws have no real use in my arsenal. Oh well, it's not like I have a limit anymore on what I can learn. He would turn back, walking towards the merchant, who would introduce himself as being named Mjolnir, a rather large man, who would be grinning ear to ear, happy to see that his precious flock had been saved from this dragon through this kind stranger's ability. It was through this save that Gojo would have gotten a free dinner for him and the kids, so Mjolnir would have invited them back to his mansion, where he would have dinner with the man who saved his life as well as the children he was teaching. Mjolnir's intelligence network as a merchant would have already identified who Rimuru was, with him being notorious for having taken out Charybdis, not to mention his relationship with the adventurers who had taken out the orc disaster. Gojo would freely invite Mjolnir to come check out Tempest if he wants to help sell anything, saying they could use a little variety just like they have here. Gojo thinking it'd be nice to have some wares and some travel gifts for people to buy when they come visit. After the meal, one of Mjolnir's maids would ask if it was alright if she could pray for the blessing of these children. She'd begin her prayer to the Elemental Queen. This would cause Gojo to become curious, asking about why she used that prayer specifically. It's not like he mentioned anything about the spirits that he was looking for. How conveniently that she actually came from a country near the dwelling of elementals, the spirit cavern that the original Queen of Elementals, who had been Trainee's master, before she died were living in, and she was more than happy to share its location with him, which would give Gojo, as well as Ranga and the kids, a clear path forward for how Gojo could successfully save everyone. Meanwhile, other forces had begun to brew. In the background, we can see a table of demon lords, this of course being Clayman, Frey, Carrion, and the others. Millen would be talking about her bestie, Rimuru, but Clayman would only have one thought in his mind, and he spared their lives? If he saved Carrion's men, he must be soft. I bet he's easy prey. And if that's the case, I'll teach that damn slime its place. If you guys enjoyed Volume 4, For That Time Satoru Gojo Got Reincarnated as a Slime, considering you've made it this far, you might as well hit all those pretty little buttons down there. Especially the red one with the cool little bell next to it. That is, of course, only if you want more of my content injected straight into your veins. Then definitely do that. For those of you that decide to stick around, I'll see you in the future content, and Volume 5, of course, coming out soon.